Everyone, thank you. It's quite a heavy thing that Faye said there. I apologise. He's going to get heavier. I am sorry. I did have a preach planned out a few weeks ago now, but on Thursday evening, God says it just wasn't working. Like I already knew it wasn't going to work. I don't know what it was. It just wouldn't gel. Nothing felt right. And God said I felt God say to me Thursday, he says, you know what I want you to preach about? And I think I was probably scared. I don't want people to think all I ever do is talk. I know I've only ever spoke here once, but I don't want everyone to think that all I ever do is speak political. But God has told me I have to talk about this subject today. Before I start, I do want to say that the teaching that I'm going to give is biblical. It's based on biblical principles. I do have a couple of opinions that I am going to throw in, but I will signpost them beforehand, which you can agree with or you might not. And it is quite a, what's the word? A touchy subject. It shouldn't be as Christians, but it can be to the world. Well, it is to the world. So first of all, can you put the first picture up, Irene? Is that okay? And I'm not meaning to offend anyone in any way, shape or form. That's my disclaimer, and I mean that as well. So these are the 10 Commandments, a very simplified version of them. And I was going to ask and kind of open it up for people to say which one of those was probably the easiest they would say to keep. But if I didn't get the answer I wanted, it would have made me look a bit silly. But I would probably say most people would look at there and say, I know Jesus changed some of the meanings of them, but at face value, if we look at those at face value when they were given, you shall not murder should probably be the one that's probably easiest for us, most of us, well, all of us to follow. Because you can make cases for most of the other ones to say, well, yeah, we do that. I mean, the Sabbath day holy, for example, there's a lot we can say that we don't keep it holy. And if you look at them, I mean, I'm not dwelling on that. But so I would say, and hopefully most would agree, that you shall not murder would probably be up there as probably the easiest one for us to keep. At face value, obviously, because I know Jesus said in his Sermon on the Mount about hating is also a form of murder. But just looking at that at face value, that's what I mean. So as we speak, this country is in a limbo state where we are very close to having 2 laws that make murder legal. On the 29th of November 2024 at 2:30 p.m, MPs in the UK voted in favour of assisted suicide. For those that don't know, assisted suicide is the act of deliberately assisting another person to kill themselves. The bill was originally put up in 2015, but defeated at that time by 330 votes against 118 votes. So 330 were against it, 118 votes were for it. It has now been put up again and won in Parliament by 330 votes to 275 against it. Now, this bill, at this moment in time, said strict limitations would be in place and would only be available to terminally ill people and agreed by 2 doctors and also a judge. Now, the people in support of this bill, they don't even call it assisted suicide because that sounds a bit bad. They've changed the name to assisted dying, which somehow makes it sound more palatable. Indeed, they say there should be dignity in dying. And it's even rebranded their campaign name to be called Dignity in Dying. They used to be called Voluntary Euthanasia Society, now they're called Dignity in Dying. And you can understand that sounds appealing to a lot of people, to the vulnerable people, or even to anyone really. Because after all, who doesn't want dignity in dying? But why as a society do we always have to muddy the waters? Why do we deliberately set out to deceive? And I say we, I mean the world really, government, the nation. The black and white of this bill is that killing should never ever be a treatment. Doctors train for years and years, too many years, do you know what I mean, to save lives and not take lives. And anything contrary to that basic and fundamental truth should be rejected by us as Christians. It's an example, and a horrific example, of humans playing God. If people are dying, we should be providing comfort to them. We should be looking at palliative care. That's a political issue. But we as Christians should be praying for them. we should never, ever be killing them. A theologian called Paul Ramsey said men ought not to play God before they learn to be men. And after they have learned to be men, they will not play God. I think that's the truth in there. Now, in every country where assisted dying has been legalised, they start out with restrictions, but they never stay that way. Examples from Canada, where assisted dying is known as MAID, that's MAID, Medical Assistance in Dying it stands for, was legalised in 2016 and was only accessible for people who are terminally ill. Does that sound familiar? Within 5 years, it was expanded to people with incurable diseases. So not terminal, yeah, but manageable. That would include a lot of people. That includes people who use wheelchairs, their legs that were broken or don't work properly, not broken, the legs that don't work, can't use them, would be considered incurable. Cancer patients who have a cancer that's been diagnosed and the doctors have said they can't cure it, but they can manage it and they can, stick it to where it is and you can live for a long time even with it, they'd be classed as incurable. And that suddenly then becomes personal to most people in the room, either for yourself or for someone you know. And it even includes myself. Now, most of you, I don't know if everyone will know, but last July I was diagnosed with epilepsy. So a couple of years before then, I kept having these really weird, I didn't know what it was, so it's only July last year I knew what it was. I kept having these really weird feelings in my head. I think I passed out a couple of times, and it was in July 23 that I passed out and Faye says, "Look, you've got to go to the doctor." So I went and they said, "Yeah, everything you're saying, it's epilepsy." So put me on some tablets. I didn't pass out anymore, and there was like a metallic taste in my mouth, which was happening for years, but that went. But I was still having the deja vu weird moments. And I had a consultation with a neurologist back in November last year, so 2023, which incident is the last time I've seen them, by the way. But that's another story. And they just upped the dosage slightly. And I was still, from November to January, still having slight moments in my head still, but nothing as bad as it was. Then in January this year, so almost a year ago now, we went to a church in Georgia. Oh, look who's just walking in. That church is this young man's granddad's church. Come in, kid. Sit down. Should never have done that when I was speaking. So I went to a church. Sorry, let's get back on track. I went to a church. It's at George Road. Kid's granddad there. He runs it now, and we've known him for years. So we just go and support him every now and again. They used to do a Sunday evening worship service every month. So we went there for a few months. And on the January, he says to me, "Look, we want to pray for you today, if that's okay." And I says, yeah, that's fine. That'll be great. And there's about 20, 30 people there. They all gathered around me at the end of this service, and they just prayed, and they prayed healing. And since that day, I haven't had a single feeling in my head at all. So Jesus, he healed me on that day. And I know that. I know that to be true. Now, epilepsy, by the world standards, what I've just described, is classed as incurable. So technically, as crazy as it sounds, if I was Canadian, I'll be eligible for MAID, which is Medical Assistance in Dying, for you, kid, because you weren't here, because you were late. So I'll be eligible for it, as crazy as that sounds. But God did heal me that day. By opening the door to assisted suicide, we're slamming yet another door in God's face, effectively saying that God can't heal, so we'll just kill people instead. But what did God say about healing? Irene, can we have the verses? I'm going to go through these verses pretty quick. I'm using these verses just as a way to show what God says about healing. We're not really going to dwell on them, but I'm using them just so I've got some biblical teaching, what God says. And there's a few verses I'm going to use. So Jeremiah 33 verse 6 says, "Nevertheless, I will bring health and healing to it. I will heal my people and will let them enjoy abundant peace and security." Psalm 103 verses 2 to 3 says this, "Praise the Lord, my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgives all your sins and heals all your diseases." Psalm 41 verse 3 says, "The Lord sustains them on their sickbed and restores them from their bed of illness." Deuteronomy 32 verse 39 says, "See now that I myself am he. There is no God besides me. I put to death and I bring to life. I have wounded and I will heal, and no one can deliver out of my hand." Isaiah 53 verses 4 to 5 is a prophecy concerning Jesus. It says, "Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." 4 more verses. Malachi 4 verse 2 says, "But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in its wings. You shall go out leaping like calves from the stall." Mark 5:34, this is Jesus. He says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." Matthew 10 verse 1, Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. And you know what? I'm not standing here because we've all seen that God sometimes doesn't heal. Not physically, not on earth anyway. I believe we're all healed if we're Christians because we go to heaven and there's no pain in heaven. But sometimes God decides not to heal on earth. So even if he doesn't decide to heal, we can still stand by this last verse. Psalm 73 verse 26 says, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Nothing else and no one else. So if we are in that position, and I feel sorry for anyone in that position, it's a horrible place to be. But we shouldn't be giving up on them. We should let God be the strength and our portion forever. This bill seeks to take on God and the notion that he should be our portion and not anything man can offer, but God's our portion. And I can give you probably 100 more verses, but I think you get my point. The Bible is for healing. There are just some stats about this MAID in Canada. Incredibly, MAID, which is medical assistance in dying, is now the 5th leading cause of death in Canada. In 2016 to 2023, it has increased 13-fold. Political commentator Matt Walsh says, "If this was in any other context, i.e. a new strain of COVID, a public health emergency would be declared." Assisted dying has come out of nowhere to be one of the top 5 ways Canadian people die. I'm going to read an article. It's from the Christian Institute, so I'm not saying it's biased, but obviously it's from a Christian perspective. So keep that in mind, just so I don't want to be just so unfair. It's from a Christian perspective, but it's about a grandmother in Canada. Some people might have heard of this article. I'm just going to read, it's only a short article. It'll take me a couple of minutes to read it. So, a grandmother in Canada has reported that she was pressured to consider euthanasia before undergoing cancer surgery. The 51-year-old from Nova Scotia told the Christian Medical and Dental Association that although she refused to discuss medical assistance in dying, MAID, at the time of her first operation, she was pushed to consider it again when she returned for a second mastectomy 9 months later. Since legalising MAID for certain circumstances in 2016, Canada has already abolished the requirement for a person to be terminally ill and intends to expand it to those who suffer from mental health problems from 2027. The woman reflected, "I was sitting in 2 surgical gowns, one front ways and one backwards. With a cap on my hair and boots on my feet, I was shivering and in a hard plastic chair and all alone in a hallway. When the doctor asked if she knew about MAID, she said, 'I don't want to talk about that. I was scared and I was alone and I was cold and I didn't know what was coming. Why was I being asked about assisted dying when I was on my way into what I truly believe was a life-saving surgery?' The woman stated that the repeated offers of euthanasia made her feel like a problem that needed to be rid of instead of a patient in need of treatment. In the Canadian province of Saskatchewan, Linda Madaford said she was invited to a MAID presentation at her father's care home the day after he arrived. She said, "There is pressure that if you aren't open to the idea, you should be. I worry for the people who feel the pressure of, well, my doctor advised it, or someone with a clipboard came around and kept asking." Palliative medicine consultant Dr. Lenny Herx highlighted that as a result of staff shortages, some hospitals have offered euthanasia to non-terminally ill patients before discussing palliative care. She emphasised in some cases MAID has become the only therapy provided, which is completely horrific from a medical perspective. According to a report by the Chief Coroner of Ontario, 67% of the 116 non-terminally ill adults who were killed in their province last year reported emotional distress, anxiety, fear, or existential suffering. Almost 40% were also concerned about being a burden on family, friends, or caregivers. In one case, a woman in her 50s underwent MAID after she suffered social isolation when she was unable to secure housing to suit her medical needs. Since MAID was first legalised in 2016, it has resulted in the deaths of 44,958 Canadians, with the number of those killed through the scheme rising by more than 350% between 2017 and 2022. So that's the article. Irene, can you put Proverbs up, please? Proverbs 6, verse 16 to 19 says this: "There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community." The Lord hates hands that shed innocent blood. He hates a heart that devises wicked schemes, and he hates feet that are quick to rush into evil. Now, if these laws aren't just that, I'm not sure what is. You see, for anyone awake with their eyes wide open, this bill and subsequent vote in favour of it should stir us as Christians to action. Now, this is a personal opinion I'm going to give you now, just so you know. My personal opinion: is there an agenda to cut out healing in this world, in this nation, be that by God or by medicines? Remember that God created humans for a purpose, in his own image. And I've said this before, some people may have just been created to create new medicines. So is there a subconscious evil agenda to cut out the healing in this nation, or indeed the world? MAID in Canada costs on average $700 per murder. Can't call it anything else. I would assume that cost will be similar in the UK once they legalise it, and we can keep praying that they won't, by the way. There's been muted news reports recently that a new medicine called donanemab has been approved. And in a nutshell, what this does is it slows down the effects of Alzheimer's. It costs around $700 per treatment, but the NHS have ruled it out in the UK because of cost concerns. I find it very interesting how those figures match. And it gets even more interesting in a second. Now, the other issue I want to talk about is abortion. Now, abortion has been legal in the UK for 56 years. And I want to give you some statistics on abortion, if that's okay. Now, there are 73 million abortions a year worldwide. And I broke this down because I think it's shocking. It accumulates to 200,000 abortions a day, 8,333 abortions an hour, 138 abortions a minute, and 5 abortions every 2 seconds. Just when I read that out. 61% of all unplanned pregnancies end in abortion. 30% of pregnancies in general, so planned or unplanned, also end in abortion. In the UK, so just the UK, in 2022, there were 252,000 abortions, which accumulates to roughly 4,800 abortions per day. The NHS spends around £1 million a week on repeat abortions, which are basically abortions that people seek as a form of contraception. The NHS funds 91% of all abortions in the UK, which are paid for by the British taxpayers. They can cost between £550 to the maximum of £880, what I found, per abortion to the NHS. And I think if you average that out, interestingly, and then convert it to dollars, it's about $700. So we can spend $700 per abortion, but not $700 on medicine to improve the life of dementia sufferers. And okay, I've picked out an isolated case. I know that the NHS does pay for medicine, and there's a lot of medicines out there, so I'm not dismissing that. But I'm just pulling this out just as an example, that they just reject something that could really help dementia sufferers, and yet they just won't pay for it. And a huge case made by a lot of people is, what about if the lady's raped? And yeah, it's a genuine concern. But less than 0.5% of that figure is due to being a victim of rape. It equates to about 100 abortions per year due to rape in the UK. Now that's tragic, it's inexcusable, and I'm not undermining that for a second, okay? I'm not going to give my opinion on that either. But it is minuscule compared to the numbers I've just read out. Remember that we were created in God's image, and every single life was created for a purpose. Now, Faye, she touched on something earlier. She has an amazing testimony, which she said I can share with you. Now, in November 1985, Faye's mum and her dad and her auntie and her two sisters, who were 2 and 1? Nearly 2 and nearly 1. Nearly 3, nearly 1, yeah. So they're both in the pushchair. They were crossing the busy Wolverhampton Road. They stopped, the lights were letting them go, and a speeding car smashed into them. The girls were dragged underneath the car in the pushchair, dragged up the road for quite a distance. Paula, that's Faye's mum, she was smashed into and tossed on the other side of the road. She broke her pelvis, she broke her nose. There were so many things. The girls were taken to hospital. They're alive. But they were left disabled. Hayley, the older one, she was awake when the accident happened, so she was more severely brain damaged than the younger one, Terry. But they're both disabled. They can both walk, they can talk, but Hayley's more brain damaged than the other one, like I say. But Paula, she was hit into the other side of the road, and her pelvis was broken, and they took her to hospital. And they did all the scans on her, and they said, "Do you know that you are 4 days pregnant?" And she goes, "No, she never knew." But they advised her to have an abortion. They says, "Look, you've got a broken pelvis, you've got all this going on, you've got children in that other room that might die. It's 4 days, it can just go." But she refused. She refused to have that abortion. And then in July of 1986, Faye was born. And since Faye's been alive, I think most of us can agree she's touched a lot of people just in this room, but throughout her life. But if that decision was made to have her aborted, that never would have happened. I wouldn't have met her, my kids wouldn't be here. And I know everyone, we can say that about anything, but it's just a single example of how God has a purpose for each and every life. So when we just diminish life and just get rid of it, we're actually going up against God. We are tampering with God's purpose when we kill innocent children. The devil's agenda is set up in direct opposition to God's laws. Most of the don'ts of God, which we saw up there earlier, are the do's of Satan. This world has glamorized other gods and false religion. It's glamorized taking the Lord's name in vain. It's glamorized not keeping the Sabbath holy. It's glamorized adultery and sex and everything else. And now it appears we're glamorizing murder. Abortion is being used as a woman's right. My body, my choice is often branded around. But the fact that the world has set out to diminish women's rights to being comparable with murdering their unborn children is a disgrace. Equality for women should never look the same as dead children. One thing you'll find the pro-abortionists will say is they will never refer to the baby in the womb as a baby. They use the word fetus. Some will even, I've seen videos where they've called the baby a tumour, comparing it to cancer. Even if you go on the abortion section of the NHS website, they won't mention baby. They will just refer to the baby as the pregnancy. My point is, they will never call the baby what it is, as then it then becomes real. Now, as I said at the beginning, I'm not victimizing any woman for having an abortion. It's not my place. And I'm not saying any woman who's ever had an abortion shouldn't be allowed in church. The state has bowed to Satan's regime and has fallen under the pressure. As a result, women are almost expected to use abortion as a form of contraception. And if you disagree, you're anti-woman. Women are being pressured into this to the point where we now can't even see a baby as a baby anymore. The devil's scheme to me here is simple. If we can't acknowledge life as life, how can we possibly see murder as murder? As Christians, we need to stand up and start representing the truth of the Bible, the truth of God's word. I read Matthew 19. Thank you. Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Psalm 127 verse 3 says, "Children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring, a reward from him." And Psalm 139 verse 13, quite a famous verse that a lot of pro-life people would use. "For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb." From day one of conception to the 9 months when the baby's born, God knitted us together and placed us there for a purpose. How dare we play God and rip apart God's handiwork? How dare we play God? Now, as Christians, all we can do is trust God to do what he sees as true and just, and he will take care of these oppressors. My last verse is Psalm 94, verses 1 to 11, and this clearly shows that God is ultimately in control. "The Lord is a God who avenges. O God who avenges, shine forth. Rise up, judge of the earth. Pay back to the proud what they deserve. How long, Lord, how long will the wicked be jubilant? They pour out arrogant words. All the evildoers are full of boasting. They crush your people, Lord. They oppress your inheritance. They slay the widow and the foreigner. They murder the fatherless. They say, the Lord does not see. The God of Jacob takes no notice. Take notice, you senseless ones among the people. You fools, when will you become wise? Does he who fashioned the ear not hear? Does he who formed the eye not see? Does he who disciplines the nations not punish? Does he who teaches mankind lack knowledge? The Lord knows all human plans. He knows that they are futile. Does he who fashioned the ear not hear? Does he who formed the eye not see? And does he who disciplines the nations not punish?" And I believe God does punish. It is another opinion of mine. Again, just signposting it for you. A lot of people last weekend had said they hadn't seen a storm like that in 30 years or more. I think everyone here will have a story of seeing a tree blown over or your fences knocked out. I mean, we've seen stories of roofs being blown off houses, haven't we? I personally don't see it as a coincidence. Now, I'm open for people to disagree with it, that on the 29th of November, MPs voted in favour of the assisted suicide bill. And then the weekend of the 7th to the 8th of December, we have these terrible storms. But God looks after his own. And if that was God's wrath on this nation, albeit minor to what will come, then God does look after his own. We had a bit of a Passover experience last weekend. Over the last few years, we've had huge conifer trees, and they've just grown out of hand in our garden. But we decided a couple of years ago to get rid of them, to chop them down. And we've been doing that slowly, because we're doing it on our own. It's hard, they were massive. So they've all gone now. They went in the summer, finally finished doing it in the summer. But the neighbours either side haven't, and they've just totally massive. This one tree is as big as 2 houses. And it was blowing in the wind the other day, and it kind of leant over. This is his side. Then there's our office at the back of the garden, which is like a summer house thing, which we used to do all our business in. And then you've got the other garden on the other side. But this is our office, and then you've got a metre away, this tree, there's a fence in between them, the tree grows, and this huge tree, and it kind of leaned over a bit. And I said to Faith, that thing goes, not ever thinking it would, that's going to land straight on our office, and could even hit our house. And if we're sat in that office, it doesn't bear thinking about. But I thought, it's not going to be all right, because it ain't gone anywhere, do you know what I mean, for years and years and years. But I went out at 9 o'clock on Saturday night, 9 p.m, and I looked, and this tree had fallen over. Literally, this huge, mighty tree had fallen over. And it had gone, even though it was leaning towards our house, it had gone straight into his garden, and it had gone all the way up to his house. So his house is here, and the tree was sort of there. And it hadn't damaged a fence. All it had done is sort of knocked out. There was a couple of fences in front of his tree, and it had just took them out. That's it. It hadn't knocked his shed down. It hadn't touched anything. It hadn't touched obviously hadn't touched our summer house. And there was no way that could have happened, do you know what I mean? It was incredible, and it was really like a Passover experience. God looks after his own. And it was just incredible. Now, that makes sense, but I did some research, because I looked I told you when I started talking about abortion, when it was legalised, and it was legalised in April 1968. I did some further research, and in July 1968, this country experienced storms it had not witnessed for over 200 years. If you Google the storms of 1968 in the UK, you'll see it for yourselves. And I am happy to concede this could be a coincidence. I really am. However, there are plenty of scriptures, I ain't got them for you now, showing that God will avenge, like the psalm I've just read to you. Could this be God's wrath on this nation, or the start of it? Now, before I am finished, but I want to finish with a song that we found. It's from the perspective of a husband and wife who made a choice to have an abortion before they were Christians, but now they regret it. But what they realise, and if anyone has had an abortion, that little one is now in the arms of Jesus. If you've ever made that choice to have an abortion, then take comfort that that child is safely in heaven with Jesus, and you are forgiven. If you've accepted Jesus into your life, then you are washed with his blood and completely restored. If not, then it's not too late. Just speak to one of us after the service, and we can talk to you. As I say, I haven't said anything, what I've said, to condemn anyone. We're forgiven in Jesus, because we've got a gracious God. But please, if anything I've said has struck a nerve or struck a chord with anyone, then please come and talk to me, or James, or Andy's there, as if anyone around will be able to help you. But I'm going to play this song now. It's called What Could You Have Become? I think that was working. It's on you.
Buried Reality is, in the time it's took me to say 4,500